Fluorescent bulbs buzzed like dying wasps above the triage desk. Ilara stared at the lukewarm coffee in her styrofoam cup, counting the minutes until dawn. Then automatic gunfire shredded the glass doors. 4 armed men stormed the ER, expecting terrified civilians. They didn't realize who was on shift. Fluorescent lights in County General's emergency room didn't just hum, they vibrated right into your teeth. At 3:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, the air always smelled exactly the same. A grim cocktail of industrial bleach, stale urine, and the bitter acidity of burnt coffee. Ilara leaned against the medication cart, absently rubbing her left knee. The joint ached when the barometer dropped, a permanent souvenir from a botched static line jump over a blacked-out Afghan valley a lifetime ago. She was 34 now. She wore faded blue scrubs that smelled like cheap lavender detergent and comfortable, ugly nursing clogs. Her brown hair was scraped into a messy bun, held together by sheer tension and a plastic clip. She looked like exactly what she was supposed to be, an overworked, underpaid night nurse, counting down the hours until she could crawl into her unmade bed. Dr. Adamson was complaining about his second ex-wife's alimony demands, his voice a droning monotone that blended with the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor in Trauma 2. Toby, a 19-year-old orderly, sat on a plastic chair near the entrance, mindlessly scrolling through his phone, his jaw rhythmically snapping a piece of bubble gum. It was utterly mundane. Ilara hated it. She also clung to it. Nursing was supposed to be her penance. After a decade of taking lives, of operating in the murky, violent shadows, as one of the first women integrated into the Navy SEALs and subsequently drafted into Tier 1 task forces, she wanted to fix bodies instead of breaking them. She had traded the freezing surf of Coronado and the oppressive heat of Fallujah for the sterile chill of a city hospital. Then the reinforced safety glass of the main entrance turned into a million glittering diamonds. The sound didn't register as gunfire to the civilians. Adamson jumped, spilling his chart. Toby dropped his phone. But Ilara's body knew the concussive, ripping crack of a short-barreled rifle indoors before her conscious mind could process it. Muscle memory hijacked her nervous system. She didn't gasp. She didn't scream. Ilara dropped instantly, folding her body small, sliding behind the heavy steel frame of the medication cart, just as a secondary burst of fire chewed through the drywall where she had been standing seconds before. Plaster dust plumed into the air, coating the back of her throat with a chalky dryness. Heavy boots crunched over shattered glass. 4 men. "Nobody moves! Everybody on the fucking ground!" a voice roared. The leader. Let's call him Briggs. He sounded breathless, operating on a cocktail of adrenaline and probably cheap amphetamines. Ilara didn't peek over the cart. She pressed her cheek against the cold linoleum floor, looking beneath the gap. She saw their footwear, scuffed combat boots, unlaced at the top, mud on the treads. They stepped wide, trying to look tactical, but their spacing was a mess. They were clustered too tight, an easy spray-and-pray target. "Where is he?" Briggs screamed. "Where's the guy the ambulance brought in 20 minutes ago? The gunshot wound to the shoulder." A cartel hit, Ilara realized. Or a gang retaliation. They were here to finish a job. Dr. Adamson was on his knees, his hands trembling violently in the air. I don't know who you mean. We have multiple..." A dull thud echoed through the lobby as Briggs drove the butt of his rifle into Adamson's jaw. The doctor collapsed, spitting teeth and a string of garbled moans. Toby whimpered, curling into a fetal position near the waiting room chairs. Ilara lay completely still. Her heart was beating a steady, rhythmic drumline against her ribs. It wasn't the frantic flutter of panic. It was the cold, mechanical thump of an engine turning over. A toxic dose of adrenaline flooded her system. She squeezed her eyes shut. She didn't want this. She had walked away. She had handed in her trident, packed up her locker, and sworn she was done with the copper scent of violence. She wanted to stay hidden. She wanted to let the police handle it. But the police were at least 8 minutes away. 8 minutes was an eternity in a gunfight. These men were amateurs, and amateurs were infinitely more dangerous than professionals because they panicked. If they didn't find their target soon, they would start shooting hostages just to relieve the tension. "Check the back rooms," Briggs ordered, racking the charging handle of his weapon. "Dawson, watch the door. Carter, go clear those hallways. Shoot anyone who runs." Footsteps began to scatter. One set of heavy boots turned toward the corridor where Ilara was hiding. She inhaled slowly through her nose, holding the breath in her diaphragm, and let it out through pursed lips. The ache in her knee vanished, entirely overridden by the chemical dump in her brain. The tired, cynical nurse disappeared into the sterile, humming air of the hospital. The operator woke up. She crawled backward, moving with absolute silence on her hands and knees. She slipped around the corner into the darkened supply corridor, melting into the shadows just as the gunman named Carter rounded the bend. The supply corridor was a narrow tunnel lined with metal racks, smelling sharply of rubbing alcohol and the metallic tang of packaged gauze. The fluorescent lights overhead were set to motion sensors, which Ilara had deliberately avoided triggering by staying low, hugging the perimeter of the wall. She needed a weapon. Her eyes scanned the dark shelves. A scalpel was useless, too brittle, no stopping power against a man wearing heavy clothing. A fire extinguisher was too heavy to swing quickly. Her hand brushed against a tall, green cylinder. An oxygen tank, solid steel, narrow enough to grip, heavy enough to crush a skull. She wrapped her fingers around the cold neck of the valve and lifted it. It weighed about 15 pounds. Perfect. Footsteps squeaked against the freshly waxed linoleum. Carter was moving slowly, his breathing jagged and loud. He reeked of stale weed, cheap body spray, and the sour pheromones of fear. He was young, probably no older than 22, holding a modified Glock with a high-capacity magazine. His finger was resting inside the trigger guard, a fatal mistake if he tripped, but deadly for anyone who jumped him. Ilara wedged herself into the gap between two supply racks, pressing her spine against the cold wall. She closed her eyes, visualizing the geometry of the hallway. 3 steps to the intersection. He would clear the corner first. "Don't do this," a small, tired voice in her head whispered. "Just let him walk past." But Carter stopped right at the edge of the racks. He raised his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, sweeping across the boxes of saline. If he took one more step, he would see her shoulder. Ilara didn't think. She simply acted. She stepped out from the shadows, her left hand swatting the barrel of the Glock upward, pointing it at the ceiling. Carter's eyes went wide, flashing white in the dim light. He pulled the trigger out of pure shock. The gun roared, deafening in the confined space, blowing a hole through the acoustic ceiling tiles and raining asbestos dust down on them. Simultaneously, Ilara drove the base of the oxygen tank directly into his leading kneecap. The sickening crunch of cartilage and bone was masked by the ringing in her ears, but she felt the joint give way. Carter screamed, his leg buckling. As he dropped, Ilara swung the tank upward, catching him under the chin. It wasn't a clean, cinematic knockout. Carter's teeth clicked together violently, but he didn't go unconscious. Instead, he thrashed wildly, his free hand clawing at her face. He was frantic, fighting with the unpredictable strength of a trapped animal. They tangled and went down onto the hard linoleum. Carter was heavier, dropping his weight onto her chest. The impact knocked the wind out of her lungs. He swung an elbow down, catching her on the cheekbone. White-hot pain flared behind her eyes. Ilara grunted, tasting copper. She didn't try to punch him back. Punches broke knuckles. Instead, she let go of the oxygen tank, reached up, and drove her thumbs into the soft, unprotected tissue of his throat, right above the collarbone. Carter gagged, dropping the gun to grab her wrists. His fingernails dug deeply into her forearms, tearing the skin, drawing warm, wet lines down her sleeves. He was choking on his own spit, his eyes bulging. Ilara wrapped her legs around his waist, shifting her hips, using his own panicked momentum against him. With a sharp twist, she rolled them over, taking the top position. The floor was slick with the sweat pouring off him. She pinned his right arm beneath her knee, grabbed a handful of his greasy hair, and slammed the back of his head against the linoleum. Once, twice. Carter's eyes rolled back. His body went limp, his bladder letting go, releasing a sharp scent of urine that mingled with the rubbing alcohol. Ilara pushed herself off him, chest heaving. She wiped a smear of spit and blood from her cheek, her hands shaking. It wasn't fear causing the tremors. It was the adrenaline crash, the violent shift from stasis to absolute brutality. She leaned against the supply rack, her breathing ragged, staring at the unconscious boy on the floor. She hated this. She hated how easily the violence came back, like riding a bicycle through a minefield. She had spent 3 years learning how to talk to people, how to check their vitals, how to hold their hands when they were scared. In 30 seconds, she had regressed into a weapon. Down the hall, Briggs's voice echoed, muffled but angry. "Carter! The hell was that shot? Carter!" Ilara looked down at the Glock lying on the floor. It looked heavy, ugly, and soaked in the dim light. She picked it up. The polymer grip felt greasy in her palm. She hit the magazine release, caught the mag in her other hand, checked the rounds by touch, and slapped it back in. She racked the slide, ejecting the chambered round, and let a fresh one feed in to ensure it wasn't jammed. 14 rounds. She checked Carter's pockets and found a spare magazine. She slipped it into the pocket of her scrubs, right next to her pen light and the trauma shears. "Carter, answer me, you stupid son of a bitch!" Ilara clicked the safety off. The soft, metallic snick felt deafening in the quiet hallway. She stepped over Carter's unconscious body, her nursing clogs making no sound on the floor. She rolled her shoulders, ignoring the throbbing ache in her cheek and the stinging scratches on her arms. She wasn't a hero saving the day. She was just a tired nurse who wanted to finish her shift, and these heavily armed idiots were standing between her and a cold beer. She melted back into the shadows, moving toward the lobby. Ilara pressed her spine against the edge of the drywall, feeling the gritty plaster dust sticking to the sweat on her neck. Down the corridor, the main triage desk looked like a shipwreck. Papers littered the floor like dead leaves. A shattered computer monitor sparked intermittently, spitting a thin ribbon of grey smoke that smelled of fried electronics and sharp ozone. Dawson was the immediate problem. He stood near the shattered glass of the entrance, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his rifle aimed lazily toward the street. Miller was digging through the glass-fronted cabinets in Trauma 1, throwing boxes of sterile gauze and heavy saline bags onto the floor, cursing violently. Briggs was pacing a tight circle around Dr. Adamson, kicking a rolling stool out of his way with a frustrated snarl. They were unraveling. The initial adrenaline rush of the breach was fading, leaving them jittery and paranoid. Ilara squeezed the polymer grip of the Glock. Her palms were slick, making the weapon feel entirely unbalanced. She was accustomed to custom grips and meticulously maintained firearms, not some street-modified garbage that rattled when you tilted it. Her left knee pulsed with a dull, sickening rhythm. Adrenaline was a profound liar. It masked the pain for the first few minutes, but as the chemical spike leveled out, her body's physical debt came due. Her hands trembled. It was not fear. It was the raw, toxic exhaustion of a body pushed abruptly from stasis into survival mode. She forced her breathing into a rigid box pattern. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4. Dawson had an angle on the hallway. If Ilara stepped out to handle Briggs, Dawson would cut her in half before she could transition her aim. She needed a distraction. Her foot brushed against a heavy steel bedpan, discarded near a linen cart. Ilara hooked her toe under the rim and kicked it hard down the adjoining side corridor. It skidded across the linoleum with a horrific, metallic screech that bounced off the tiled walls. Dawson snapped toward the sound, his boots squeaking on the floor. "Who's there?" He stepped into the corridor, raising his weapon, peering into the gloom. He was completely focused on the sound, abandoning his post at the front doors. Ilara did not try to take a clean, cinematic headshot. That was how you missed under pressure. She aimed center mass, relying on the oldest, ugliest rule of engagement. Put rounds on the largest available target. She stepped wide of the corner, leveled the pistol, and pulled the trigger twice. The noise in the enclosed hospital wing was catastrophic. The concussive wave slapped her eardrums, instantly replacing the background hum of the ER with a high-pitched, agonizing whine. Dawson grunted violently as both rounds struck his chest armor. The cheap Kevlar stopped the penetration, but the blunt force trauma was immense. He did not fly backward. His knees simply turned to water, and he folded in on himself, collapsing into a heap of limbs and canvas gear. He gasped, entirely winded, dropping his rifle as he clutched at his fractured ribs. Ilara didn't hesitate. She closed the distance in 3 rapid strides and kicked the rifle far out of his reach. Before he could draw enough breath to scream, she brought the heavy base of the Glock down hard against his temple. Dawson went limp, his forehead hitting the floor with a dull, heavy thud. 2 down, 2 left. The deafening echo of the shots sent the triage area into absolute chaos. "Dawson!" Briggs roared, his voice cracking. He spun around, grabbing Toby by the collar of his scrubs and dragging the terrified orderly up from the floor. He pressed the barrel of his rifle against the boy's neck. "Who the hell is shooting? Carter! Dawson!" Miller popped out of Trauma 1, his eyes wide and frantic. "Cops! Did the cops breach?" "There aren't any sirens, you idiot," Briggs screamed, spinning in a circle, using the sobbing teenager as a human shield. "Someone's in here." Ilara hated this. She hated the noise. She hated the ringing in her ears, and she intensely resented these men for dragging her back into this headspace. She ducked behind a heavy supply cart loaded with bags of intravenous fluids, her chest heaving. Her cheekbone throbbed where Carter had struck her, the skin tight and swelling fast. She wiped a line of sweat from her forehead, leaving a faint crimson smear across her skin from her torn knuckles. She needed to separate them. Briggs was dug in, shielded by Toby. Miller was exposed, standing in the doorway of the trauma bay, his weapons sweeping erratically. Ilara grabbed a 1-liter bag of saline from the bottom shelf of the cart. It was heavy, dense, and tightly pressurized. She tossed it over the cart, aiming for the ceiling tiles just above Miller's head. As the heavy bag arched through the air, Ilara leaned around the opposite side of the cart and fired a single round into the plastic. The saline bag exploded like a water balloon. A heavy shower of sterile fluid rained down over Miller's head and shoulders. Startled, he flinched wildly, throwing his arms up to protect his face from what he thought was falling debris. It was a 2-second window. Ilara took it. She burst from behind the cart, ignoring the agonizing flare in her knee. Miller tried to bring his rifle down, but he was blinded by the fluid and severely off balance. Ilara didn't shoot. She was too close, and the risk of a pass-through round hitting an oxygen line in the wall was entirely too high. Instead, she closed the gap, grabbed the hot barrel of his rifle with her left hand, and shoved it violently toward the ceiling. With her right hand, she drove the frame of the Glock squarely into his sternum. The impact cracked bone. Miller wheezed, his eyes bulging as all the oxygen left his lungs. Ilara swept her right leg behind his calf and shoved hard. Miller went down backward, hitting the linoleum with a heavy, wet slap. Ilara dropped her weight onto his chest, pressing her forearm across his throat. She didn't have time for a prolonged struggle. She drove her knee upward, catching him squarely in the groin. Miller's eyes rolled back, his mouth opening in a silent, agonizing scream, and his grip on his weapon vanished. Ilara stripped the rifle from his hands, tossed it under a nearby gurney, and rolled off him, gasping for air. 3 down, 1 to go. "I'll kill him!" Briggs shrieked, his voice echoing off the sterile tiles. "I swear to God, I will blow this kid's head off. Show yourself." Ilara leaned against the wall outside Trauma 1, sucking wind. Her lungs burned. Her scrubs were soaked in sweat, saline, and a dark, copper-scented wetness that wasn't hers. She felt incredibly old. Every joint protested. Her hands were shaking so severely she had to press her forearms against her stomach to steady them. She peeked around the doorframe. Briggs was backed into the corner of the nurses' station, directly under a flickering fluorescent tube. He had Toby locked in a rear naked choke, the barrel of his rifle jammed awkwardly under the boy's chin. Toby was crying silently, his face purple, unable to draw a full breath. Dr. Adamson was still on the floor, curled into a ball, his hands clamped over his ears. Briggs was terrified. His eyes darted around the room, wide and unblinking. He was sweating profusely, the moisture causing his grip on the rifle to slip. He was a ticking bomb, completely devoid of tactical discipline, operating purely on a toxic cocktail of fear and whatever amphetamines were burning through his veins. Ilara stepped out from cover. She didn't raise her weapon. She let the Glock hang casually by her side, pointing at the floor. "Put the gun down, Briggs," she said. Her voice was flat, raspy, and entirely devoid of emotion. Briggs flinched, whipping the barrel of his rifle toward her. "Who the hell are you? Where are my guys?" "They're sleeping," Ilara lied effortlessly, slowly walking toward the center of the room. She kept her posture slumped, looking exactly like the exhausted, beaten-down nurse she was. "You're making a massive mess in my ER. And frankly, I have enough paperwork to do tonight without adding 4 homicide reports to the pile." "Stay back," Briggs screamed, tightening his grip on Toby. The orderly let out a choked squeak. "I'll shoot him. I'll do it." "No, you won't," Ilara said, stopping about 15 feet away. She let out a long, tired sigh, shifting her weight off her bad knee. "You came here for a guy with a shoulder wound, a hit. That means you're getting paid. You don't get paid for shooting an orderly in a hospital lobby. You just get the FBI kicking your door down tomorrow morning." Briggs swallowed hard. His eyes flicked from Ilara to the empty hallway, then back to her. He was processing the logic, trying to find a hole in it through the fog of his panic. "I'm walking out of here," Briggs stammered, his bravado severely dented. "I'm taking the kid to my car, and I'm driving away." "You can't do that," Ilara replied, taking one slow step to her right, forcing him to track her movement. "Because you parked in the ambulance bay. I saw your truck through the glass. The cops are already pulling into the driveway. You have about 40 seconds before this room fills up with SWAT." It was a total bluff, but Briggs didn't know that. He glanced toward the shattered glass doors, distracted for a fraction of a second. Ilara moved. She didn't raise the gun, she threw it. She pitched the heavy polymer pistol directly at his face like a baseball. It was a clumsy, desperate move, but it was completely unexpected. Briggs flinched, raising his arms instinctively to block the heavy black object flying at his head. His grip on Toby loosened. The heavy pistol smashed into the bridge of Briggs's nose with a sickening crunch. He howled in pain, stumbling backward, his rifle dipping toward the floor. Ilara closed the distance instantly. She didn't use a martial arts throw or a clean tactical strike. She simply tackled him, hitting him low and hard around the waist. Her shoulder slammed into his stomach, driving the remaining air from his lungs. They crashed into the triage desk, sending a cascade of keyboards, clipboards, and pens clattering to the floor. Briggs thrashed wildly, bringing the heavy metal butt of his rifle down toward Ilara's back. She deflected it with her forearm, crying out as the metal bruised her bone deeply. She grabbed handfuls of his jacket, using her momentum to drag him completely to the floor. They scrambled on the slick linoleum. Briggs swung a wild punch, catching Ilara on the jaw. Her vision flared bright white, and a sudden wave of nausea rolled through her stomach. She tasted a fresh surge of copper in her mouth. Enough. Ilara grabbed a heavy, metal three-hole punch that had fallen from the desk. She gripped it tightly and swung it backward, driving the steel corner directly into Briggs's temple. The sound was dull and final. Briggs's eyes rolled back, his body going instantly slack. His head hit the floor, and he lay perfectly still, his chest rising and falling with shallow, ragged breaths. Ilara dropped the hole punch. It clattered loudly in the sudden, eerie silence of the room. She rolled off him, collapsing onto her back, staring up at the acoustic ceiling tiles. The fluorescent lights vibrated against her retinas. Her chest heaved violently. Every single muscle in her body ached with a deep, burning intensity. "Toby," she wheezed, not taking her eyes off the ceiling. "You okay?" Toby was kneeling near the wall, massaging his bruised throat, weeping openly. He nodded, unable to speak, staring at her with a mixture of profound terror and absolute awe. Dr. Adamson slowly sat up, peeking over the edge of the desk. He looked at Briggs, then at Miller down the hall, and finally at Ilara, who was wiping a thick smear of dirt and fluid from her swollen face. "Ilara," Adamson whispered, his voice trembling. "What? What did you just do?" Ilara slowly sat up, her joints popping. She reached up and pulled the broken plastic clip from her hair, letting the messy brown strands fall around her shoulders. She looked at the wreckage of the triage area, the shattered glass, the ruined equipment, and the 4 unconscious gunmen scattered across her ward. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing rapidly louder, cutting through the heavy silence of the night. Ilara dragged herself over to the triage desk. She righted a fallen rolling chair, sat down heavily, and reached for her styrofoam cup. The coffee was completely cold, bitter, and tasted like ash. She took a sip anyway. "I need a vacation," she muttered, staring at the shattered front doors. "And I'm definitely not cleaning this up." If this intense, gritty story got your pulse racing, you absolutely won't want to miss what we create next. Hit that like button. Share this video with anyone who loves grounded, realistic thrillers, and make sure to subscribe to our channel right now. Turn on those notifications so you are the very first to know when our next heavy-hitting series drops. What would you have done in Ilara's shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below to join the discussion.